There we go.
All right. Well, it is 7:30, so good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining UT Health San Antonio Pediatric Grand Rounds. As a reminder, as you log on, please don't forget to mute your devices. Also, the participation code will be placed in the chat box periodically, so you can check there for the code. Otherwise, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jeffrey Temple, who is a professor, licensed psychologist, and the Associate Dean for Clinical Research at the School of Behavioral Health Sciences at the UT Health Houston, where he also holds the Betty and Rose Pfefferbaum Chair in Child Mass Trauma and Resilience. As the director of the first CDC-funded Injury Control Research Center in Texas, his work focuses on the prevention of interpersonal and community violence, including firearm violence. He has been continuously federally funded by the National Institute of Justice, the NIH, and CDC since finishing his training. He has over 225 peer-reviewed scholarly publications in a variety of high-impact journals, including JAMA, JAMA Pediatrics, The Lancet Child and Adolescent Health, Pediatrics, and the Journal of Adolescent Health. He recently co-edited a book on adolescent dating violence, co-chaired the Texas Task Force on Domestic Violence, and served on the board of directors for the Society for Prevention Research and the Texas Psychological Association. He is an inaugural fellow of the Society for the Advancement of Violence and Injury Research. And locally, he served for 7 years as the vice president of the Galveston Independent School District Board of Trustees. His work has been featured on Forbes, CNN, New York Times, Time Magazine, The Washington Post, and even the satirical website, The Onion. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Jeffrey Temple.
Hey, thank you so much, Dr. Ranch, and thank you all for being here. I want to start off by saying how much I love San Antonio and the UTSA system. I went to undergrad at UTSA in the 90s. I have the tattoo on my bicep to prove it of the Roadrunner, and really loved my time there. I met my wife. I was a Starbucks barista, and she was a customer, and we've been together since. So thank you all again for having me. I'm excited to present on adolescent relationships. This is what I've devoted my work to. When I started, I went to grad school at North Texas and was still working at Starbucks, but needed a research job and was at orientation, and one of the faculty rudely stood up and said, "I need a research assistant." And she talked like that because she'd been smoking since she was like 4 years old. And I needed a real job, and she was hiring, and people told me not to work with her because she was crazy, and they were absolutely right. But she was also fantastic and became my mentor. And she studied domestic violence. And so I worked with her for my entirety of graduate training. And then when I went to Rhode Island to Brown to finish my internship and postdoc, I started working with a guy by the name of Greg Stewart, and he was doing some really cool work.
You are muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Dr. Temple, I think you've muted your microphone.
I don't even know how I did that.
There you go.
Thank you. Where was the last thing I said? You guys weren't even listening, see?
It was
grad school at
you're still working at Starbucks.
Okay, I went to Brown. All right. So yeah, so I wanted to do more like intervention work instead of just looking at the consequences of violence, which I was doing at North Texas. And so at Brown, we went into these bad intervention programs. We treated the underlying symptoms like substance use and mental health, and we saw concomitant reductions in violence. But then I wanted to actually do something to prevent violence from ever happening. And so that's when I came to actually to UTMB. I was there for 17 years, and that's when I started to look at dating violence and adolescence, and have been doing that ever since. And it was a really good time. It was sort of at the beginning of when dating violence was getting some attention, so I was able to capitalize on that. Started a longitudinal study, which I'm going to be talking about today, that we started in 2010, and we have been following the same 1,000 people since then. So for the past 15 years, and we just got a grant to continue following them. In fact, I'll put that grant here. These are those studies that have been funded by a variety of institutions. We've been going for a long time, and so we'll be following these people already from 15 to 30. And again, we just got that additional funding. So from 15 years old to 35 years old, looking at the idea originally was to look at risk and protective factors of partner violence. And now it's expanded because of all the years. We have basically anything and everything. And I'll talk about a lot of that today. Mental health, substance use, sexting, which we'll talk about today. And even up until now, many of them, half of them are parents. So now we're added a bunch of parenting stuff. And we are in the process of submitting an epigenetic study to send them all spit kits so we can look at SNPs and telomeres and other things that I don't really understand and how that relates to the developmental data. So along the way, we've done some intervention studies as well, but today I'm primarily going to be talking about what we call dating it safe. That's the name of the study that I came up with almost 17 years ago, and it stuck. So when I first started this, there were very few studies at all on dating violence. There was some increasing studies in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think the first person to use the word teen dating violence was a study in 1996, and just slowly built up. But there was really no longitudinal studies, which was really important, and not just sort of from an academic sense. If we want to prevent something, we have to know what comes first, right? So in the case of, say, something like substance use, people would talk about how it's related to dating violence and our attitudes and behaviors. If someone has a dismissive attitude toward violence against women, then they're more likely to abuse their partner. And that makes a whole lot of sense. But it could also be the case that someone who abuses their partner, in order to condone the behavior, starts to adopt those sort of justifying behaviors. So, to adopt that it's okay to beat women. So it's not just an academic sense that we need this, because we need to know if, like, attitudes and behaviors and risk factors, if they actually predict or precede violence, if we want to design prevention programs. So that was we were sort of the first one to do this long-term longitudinal study. And I mentioned this earlier, we started in 2010 when kids were in the 9th or 10th grade. And we have been conducting these surveys annually. And since wave 10, so this was in, I guess, 2020, we started to include current partners of participants, which means now we can do dyadic analyses. So we could see which is pretty rare in the field. There's only been a few studies looking at partners. So we can see if one person's sort of mental health affects the other person's violence or vice versa. The mean age at the time was 15, and again, they're now about 30 years old. So you can look at the distribution here. This was at wave 13. When we first collected the sample, it was closer to a little more females, but not this different. I guess this shows that women are easier to follow longitudinally. It's a really nice triethnic sample in the sense that there's a third Hispanic, a third Black, and a third white. And then you can see here that 31% are married, but it's a little bit higher now, closer to 47%. 46% have kids. 17% identify as a gender sexual minority, and it's a nice representative sample of socioeconomic level. 40% have an income below 50,000. Here's some of the study measures that we did, and there's a lot more than this. This is related to a lot of the violence items, but you can see that the waves next to it, 1 to 14, 12 to 14, when we added stuff, but it's everything from dating violence to sexual assault, all forms of substance use, a bunch of different mental health problems. Firearms we added in wave 8. If you look back, that coincides with the Sandy Hook shooting. That is the day after Sandy Hook. Obama loosened the restrictions on whether or not researchers could study firearms. And so we immediately added firearm questions to our longitudinal surveys, and now have been following firearm use, and got actually another grant from CDC to do in-depth interviews with known gun carriers within our sample, so we could better understand just sort of basic stuff about how people get guns, how they store it, why they carry it, where they carry it, all that sort of stuff. So it's now one of the longest running studies on firearm ownership that's ever existed, given the dearth of research that was done prior to 2013. So here's a look at retention. We've had a pretty amazing retention level. If you look across all these years from 2010 till now, 25, we had 79% of the original participants, and that includes those who have passed away, those in prison, those who said they no longer want to participate. So if you look at actual people that we could actually recruit, those still alive and that want to participate, it's closer to 90%, which is pretty remarkable for a sample, a low-income, ethnically diverse sample recruited 15 years ago. And we did it through COVID in 2020. We maintained a pretty high retention rate even during those crazy times. So we did we have 70, a little bit more now, but from Dating It Safe, we've published 70 articles from it. And one of the cool things, we actually have, I think now 101 unique authors have contributed to publications, which is pretty amazing. I mean, that means 101 CVs have Dating It Safe sample on it, which is really, really cool. So we did this content analysis of the papers. So it's, basically we looked for themes and coded articles, and then summarized those codes to see what we found. And so what we found was that some of this is new, some of this is consistent with existing research. But we found that dating violence, victimization, and perpetration frequently co-occur, so that basically when you think of violent relationships, it's very rare that one person in the couple is sort of cowering in the corner like a Lifetime movie. In fact, it's sort of this idea that violence begets violence, that violent relationships are typically characterized by mutual or bidirectional violence. And you can see the numbers here. It's been pretty consistent. The first wave, and when they were 15, 16, that is lifetime prevalence. So it started out a little bit higher for things like physical perpetration and victimization. Every year after that was past year. And speaking of that, we did a really cool study. So if you look at everything that's available, it's always like a third of kids or 20% of kids by the time they graduate high school, or a third of people just in general will experience some form of physical or psychological violence. And that number is consistently reported everywhere. Now, if you look at this, though, and the reason that is, and we showed it with our previous study slide. If you look at this, we sort of say the same thing, about 20%. Now, though, when you look at this, because most people do like retrospective, have you ever been in a violent relationship? Or in the study, they just talk about past year violence and they use that. What we did is we looked at cumulative incidents of violence. So we did each year, if someone was newly violent, we included them. If they were already violent, we didn't. So you can see that Here, by the time they were age 26, 27% of participants has experienced sexual DV victimization, which is a lot higher than what the extant literature says. 46% experienced physical DV victimization, again, quite a bit higher than that 20-30% that I mentioned earlier. 39% perpetrated physical dating violence. Again, all of this higher than what the extant literature shows. We see also that the dating violence peaks around age 20, which is fairly consistent with the literature. But one thing that I think that's really important is it still increases after that. So if you look at, for example, age 22 to age 25, it went from 33.7 to 36.7. That's an additional 3% of people that are in newly violent relationships, which means that we still need to be talking about prevention programs into the 20s with new couples. Some findings that we found, which is pretty neat, and I won't go through all of these, but I'll pick up some examples. We had parental IPV predicted. So if kids witnessed their parents violent toward each other, it increased their likelihood of being violent themselves. That in itself wasn't a novel finding. What was novel with ours is that we actually looked at whether they observed mother-to-father violence or father-to-mother violence. And what was cool, or well, not cool, but cool from a data standpoint, is that witnessing moms be violent toward dads was most predictive of kids' own violence, regardless of whether it was a boy or a girl witnessing the violence, which was different and new to the literature and suggests that maybe when mom uses violence, there's just overall more violence in the relationship that causes them to use violence, or it's that kids identify with their mothers more because they spend more time with their mom. And so if she's using violence, they're more likely to model that behavior. So that's important from a intervention standpoint, but it's also important from realizing that females also use violence and that their violence, even if it is resistance or protective, that it still is important because of the idea that violence begets violence. We also found in this study that was also cool is that acceptance of dating violence mediated the relationship between exposure to violence and perpetrating violence, which is neat because we often can't do anything about what happens at the home. You know, the parents will try, but parents are unfortunately going to still be violent toward each other. But if we can change attitudes about violence, then maybe we can stave that off a little bit. Second study that I want to talk here is this childhood corporal punishment study. And that the reason I want to talk about that is it was one of the first studies to show that spanking your kid in and of itself above child physical abuse was predictive of later dating violence perpetration. Which means that, and people have been lobbying for this, to include spanking and childhood corporal punishment as an adverse childhood experience. And I realize that several people on this call, including me, were spanked as kids, and some of us may even spank our own kids. And this is not demeaning any of us that do that. In fact, when I talked to the media about it, I sort of screwed up, and what happened in the media was I published on everything from sex to violence to drugs to firearms, and what I got the most criticism and literally death threats from was when I published this paper saying that spanking was related to dating violence perpetration. In fact, there was a article, if you guys remember, I don't know if it still exists, but the Facebook site, I effing love science, they posted this paper, and literally within 30 minutes, there were 30,000 comments, and 29,000 of them were bullshit, 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 bullshit. And several was the author of this study needs to be spanked and stuff like that. So anyway, all that to say, I really screwed up, and this is a good lesson for y'all on how I talk to the media. For this one, I was pretty upfront about it. If you spank your kids, they are more likely and the media sort of ran with that. But what I should have said is, if you have 10 kids and none of them were spanked, let's say one of those kids are going to go on to perpetrate dating violence. And then you have 10 kids, all of whom were spanked, and two of those kids are going to go on to perpetrate dating violence. So still 8 of the kids are not going to perpetrate dating violence who are spanked, but it's 100% different from the kids who weren't spanked. So if I would have done it like that, it doesn't mean that your kid's going to, it's just more likely than if they weren't. That would have been a lot better. All right, so other things, we have bullying, substance use, gender minority youth. We were one of the first groups to look at dating violence in same-sex relationships. Found that it was, for those that identify as sort of homosexual, they were pretty similar to heterosexual. It was those that identified as bisexual or questioning that it was more likely that they were in a violent relationships. But that tracks with a lot of the research out there that those kids are most susceptible to negative consequences. And it probably goes back to that, they're not accepted by either side, so to speak. So a lot of kids that are born into mixed families that they get stressed from both sides. Victimization, similar correlates and predictors of victimization, risky sexual behavior. We've looked at personality disorder. One of the biggest predictors is prior dating violence, and that shouldn't be of any surprise to anyone here. But from an long-term standpoint, what's scary is dating violence predicts adult partner violence, and we know the negative consequences and the fact that it costs us, billions, literally billions of dollars every year as a nation in lost time at work and criminal crime. Why can't I think of the word? Anyway, the money it takes to investigate crimes and put people away, and then sickness as well, and health use. So we look at what it causes and perpetration. Everything, a host of mental health problems, worsening physical health, poor sleep, substance use, and then most recently we saw that it increased the risk for parenting stress and child maltreatment. Similar things with victimization, suicidal ideations, risky sexual behavior, poor sleep, parenting stress, and child maltreatment. And of course, we talked a little bit about this, but the multi-generational impacts. And one of the cool things we're going to be doing with this study as we move forward, I'm going to hopefully continue to get funding until I die or retire, so that we'll follow these kids from, when they're age 15 to when they're age 50 or 60. And in the next round, we're going to recruit children of parents so we can really look at intergenerational impacts of things like violence and substance use and mental health. There's a lot of beginning research out there that shows like things like adverse childhood experiences are heritable in a sense, probably through social aspects like poverty and stress. All right, so just to nail it down, you see that all these studies, we see that it impacts across generations, strong multi-generational relationship between risk and impact, and underscore the interconnected nature of risk behaviors. We're starting to add more about protective factors because that in the research in general is less knowledgeable about what mitigates or protects kids from the harmful effects of violence or preventing violence from to begin with. So other areas of things that we've started to look at on its own, apart from violence necessarily, is mental health, substance use, firearms, and this last thing is what we're going to get into now, which I think is the more fun part of the talk. So if you've been bored so far, I promise it's going to get a lot more exciting. Not a lot more, but maybe minimally exciting. So sexting is what we have. In 2012, I put out a article on sexting, teen sexting specifically, And it was at the time it had reached like every major print outlet in the world. It was covered internationally. UTMB said that it had reached, I think it was close to 600, 700 million people. At the time, it was the most highly cited, talked about uh, uh, research that had ever come out of UTMB. And then just about 2 months after that study and all that 15 minutes of fame that I had, UTMB started to accept Ebola patients, and that sort of cornered the market. So, whatever. I guess Ebola is more important than sexting. The other fun thing that I had with sexting is I literally did like 2 days straight of talking to news reporters about sexting. I mean, it was for a while there because it was the first paper to ever come out about this. Like you could Google my name and pictures of naked people would come up. Like it was a kind of a safe way to look at porn at work, just by Googling my name. It's not that way anymore, unfortunately. But you know. So anyway, I was on a live call with a radio station in Atlanta, and the guy introduces the topic and starts talking about a kid that fell on a basketball court, got a pretty bad cut on his leg, his got sick. His mom took him to the doctor. Doctor sent him home, and he ended up dying. And he goes on and on about this, and I'm sitting on the phone, live radio, thinking, what the hell does this have to do with sexting? Like, oh my God, what is he doing? What am I talking about? And then it clicked that he thought I was on to talk about sepsis and not sexting. And he came back to me and he said, "So Doc, what do you think about that story?" And I'm like, "Well, sir, I mean, that's terrible. But it sounds like that's sepsis. I'm here to talk about sexting." And it was, awkwardness ensued from there, but it was a fun little thing. Also, the New York Times, the statement of record, had claims that I am the one who came up with the word teen sexting or sexting. That is not true, but it is the paper of record, so I'm going to go in to claim it until I die. That's the second time I mentioned I'm going to die. Hopefully, it's a really long time away from now. But now that I said it, it's probably going to be today, and you guys are going to learn about it tomorrow. All right. So why this research matters on sexting and social media and quote unquote kids these days, and I think we tend to see every new invention as we get scared for the kids, right? Like, what is this going to do to our kids? And we saw this with the telephone, we saw it with the automobile, we saw it with the internet, and now we see it with smartphones. And you can see my example there, this picture of everyone says that these kids don't know how to form relationships. They don't talk to anyone anymore. We've always been the same social beings. And you can see that from that photo from looks like the early 1900s, where no one's talking to each other. They're reading the newspaper. And the newspaper's just been replaced with the phone. And I'm not naive. I get that we spend way too much time with our phones and all that. But it's not destroying kids, it's not destroying us. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. It's just a different way that we communicate with each other. And there's research, there's a lot of people out there that psychologists in particular that want to get their day in the sunlight, and they talk about how smartphones are just destroying everything and relationships and all that. But if you actually look at the data, substance use is down among teens, pregnancy is down, drinking and driving is down, relationships are maybe not harmed as much as people think, and in fact, some of that stuff that I mentioned about substance use and sex and drinking and driving is a direct result of social media, for better and worse, right? Like kids are getting their driver's license longer, they're staying at home more. And you can see some problems with that. They're not establishing their autonomy, their independence. They're not hanging out in different friend groups. They're not making the same mistakes that I made as a kid that shaped me into who I am, but they're also safer. So there's a little bit of back and forth there. Now, there is increasing research that shows that kids are lonelier, more depressed, suicidality is up, and there's been a lot of people that link it to smartphones. And that probably does play a role. But you got to also remember that this generation has just gone through a world-changing pandemic, that this generation and previous generations have had to worry about school shootings. There's geopolitical strife. There is climate change that is quite literally making people move. Here in Houston, we have something every couple of years that floods and people die and people have to move, and it affects low-income people the most. So, yeah, it does impact kids, but I don't think it is as much the boogeyman as people say it is. So this is another example. At first someone could say, oh my God, look at this bright sunny day. These two baseball players are just playing on their phones. But what you have to look at closer is that this is a Dominican player and a kid from South Dakota, and they're using the translate function on their phones to talk to each other, something that couldn't have happened 10 years ago. And here, just to hammer it home a little bit, these things are confusing and harmful, create forgetfulness in the learner's souls because they will not use their memories. This could have been said about the smartphone, but in fact, it was said about the printing press and literacy. And you can see the same thing throughout development on radio, developed a habit of dividing attention between the humdrum preparation of their school assignments and the compelling excitement of the loudspeaker. On movies, corrupt the morals of children or adults are incite to crime. Might be a little bit true. On television, hurt radio, conversation, reading, and then I think the funniest ones are the email, hurts IQ more than pot. That is from C. These are actual headlines. Twitter and Facebook could harm moral values. Facebook and MySpace generation cannot form relationships. So all these things have been said. No research points to that these are accurate. None. And you can see the same thing about AI. Same things being said about AI. And, eventually I'm going to be wrong. But, we've been saying the same thing about everything forever. There's a news article talking about baseball from 1860 something, and some older generation complaining about the way the younger generation is playing baseball. So it's just something that we like to do with younger generations. They're different from us. They're not as cool as us. They don't study as much. Whatever. In reality, this generation that's coming up is the smartest, most well-connected generation that's ever existed, and the generation after them will be smarter than them. All right, so getting to the word that I invented, sexting. You can see this. Dear Jackie, how are you? I'm fine. What are you wearing? I am horny. Fondest regards, Dickie. P.S. Super horny. I put that on here to actually say that we've always sexted. You can look at some of the 1600s and letters back and forth to people. They're quite graphic and sexting. If they had smartphones, they would have done the same thing that the current generation is doing. When I was a kid, I certainly, did the Polaroid pictures and all that. It's just the difference is, the Polaroid picture would get to worst case scenario, maybe like 10 people would see it. Now the worst case scenario is literally billions of people can see it. All right, so we did this study. This is a meta-analysis that we did in a few years back. It's actually my most cited paper. I think there's 1,000 different papers that cited this paper, and it's looking at the prevalence of multiple forms of sexting. And what we found here was that 15% and 27% have sent and received a sext, respectively. So that's quite high. And then the prevalence of forwarding a sext without consent and having a sext forwarded without consent was 12% and 8%, respectively. High, but not crazy high. We also had a mix of ages, and you saw as 12-year-olds were less likely than 17-year-olds. And if you looked at 17, 18-year-olds, it's closer to half. So should we care about sexting? So this goes back to what I was talking about, what I like to call, and others have called, juvenoia, right? Paranoid about juvenile actions. And I don't want my kids are 20 and 22 now, but when I was doing this research, they are in middle school and high school, and I would, I didn't want them sex. They probably did. I didn't want them sexting. I would tell them that if they sext, I'm going to give a talk at their school about sexting to hopefully scare them out of it. But should we care about it? And I think the easy, obvious answer is yes, of course. We don't want these kids sending naked pictures. It's going to hurt their chances to get into college, and they're never going to have a job and all that sort of stuff. We know that is not necessarily true. And when we tell kids that, they know it's not true because they know their friends are sexting and nothing's happening to them. In fact, when I talk to kids about it, I usually say, I introduce it as, how many of y'all will wear a seatbelt on your way home? 100% of them raise their hands, which is a public health miracle, by the way, because when I was a kid, that was like wearing a mask, and no one wanted to wear a seatbelt. Anyway, they'll all raise their hands, and I'll say, the chance of any of you getting in an accident on the way home is negligible. So why are you wearing your seatbelt? And they say, just in case. And so then I take it back to sexting and try to at least speak their language a little bit. When Pokemon Go came out, there was a huge, literally, if you Google Pokemon, even now, Pokemon Go and police, you'll see that just about every city every media market in the country had a story about how Pokemon Go was going to lead to kidnappings and stranger danger, and people were going to die chasing these things and all that. And so really no one was kidnapped from Pokemon Go, despite all the news headlines about it. I think one person died. They were trying to catch a Pokemon on a cliff and fell off the cliff and died. And that's terribly sad, but the truth is they probably deserve to die, and it's probably good that they're out of our gene pool. I'm kidding, of course, and I say that I said that joke at a conference one time, dryly, and got the expected reaction, some laughs, some groans. And after the fact, some woman came up to me, just totally just looked mortified, with dry, and she said, that was my cousin who died. And she'd carried it for like 2 minutes, and I'm sitting there red-faced and apologizing, and then she breaks out in laughter. She was joking, of course, but that was a good. So hopefully none of you guys don't know the person who died. All right. So teens, they think about sex. This goes back to whether or not we care about sexting. They have sex quite a bit. They're going to continue having sex. And one thing that we all know is that us telling them not to have sex does not work. And in fact, might be iatrogenic and increase the likelihood of them having sex. We tell kids not to do stuff, not to drink, not to have sex, all the while talking about how great drinking is and how great sex is. So we have to do a better job of communicating to them. And so our focus should be less on preventing sex at all costs and more on preventing unwanted, trafficked, and unsafe sex, preventing forward and non-consensual sex, and you'll see that as a theme in the next 10 minutes, and then promote healthy relationships, including sex-positive relationships. Obviously not with young adolescents, but, when kids get 16, 17, 18, we, again, still don't necessarily want them to have sex. I didn't want my kids to have sex. I hope they didn't, but I was also not stupid, and I put condoms in their bathroom, and also Plan B. All right, so again, going back to do we care, there is some consequences to things like this. And you can see there's a Netflix documentary, I think it's called The Worst Person on the Internet or something like that. And it is very disturbing about, it's all about sexting and about revenge porn and people using sex against them, sextortion, or bully them until it drives them to, in the case of Jessica Logan, suicide. So we see this with Trevor, the Trevor Project. I can't remember his last name. The college student who was bullied for being gay. So, there are potential consequences, but we don't know them. So what we did was we did a meta-analysis to look at things, whether or not it was related to sexting. So there was some research out there that shows that it's related to sexual behavior, to substance use, to delinquency, and to depression and anxiety. There were also studies that showed that it was not related to these things. So we did a meta-analysis of, I can't remember how many studies it was. It was like 31 studies, 29 studies or something, but basically of about 40,000 participants. And what we found was pretty interesting. And you're going to think when I first do this that that I thought you were trying to dispel some of the alarm around sexting. And I'll get to that in a second. But if you see this, sexual activity is highly related to sexting. Delinquent behavior is related to sexting. Depression and anxiety is related to sexting. Alcohol use, drug use, smoking related to sexting. Now, what this study has is now a bit dated, and what we know now that it reflects a lot of like in-person real life behavior, that unwanted sex we know is related. So a kid has unwanted sex as a 16 or 17-year-old. We know that that's related to bad outcomes. A kid is raped as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old. We know that's related to bad outcomes. A 14-year-old has sex. We know that is related to bad outcomes. And when we start to tease apart this data, we find remarkably similar experiences to in-person, real-life sex. So when sexting was non-consensual, when it was forced, when the kid was younger, that's when we see the negative outcomes. Two 17-year-olds having consensual sex, our two 17-year-olds having consenting to sexting each other is not related to bad outcomes. So that's sort of the nuanced difference. Well, all right, the study that started this all, this was the study that I published in 2012. You see Brian W. Temple there. That's my brother. He's a pediatrician. He did not do anything for the study. I just thought I needed a MD on there to get it published in JAMA Pediatrics, and it worked. He read the pay. I was ethical, whatever. Anyway, he's a great pediatrician. If you ever get a chance to work with him, he's in Austin. He's a good dude. All right, so we published this paper, and what we found was a lot higher than what people were reporting at the time or thought at the time. And when I say people, I mean people that didn't know kids. If you asked teachers, they thought these numbers were low. But basically, a third of kids had sent a picture. Asked, 46% males asked, and then had been asked, 68% of females. Now, this was 2012. Smartphones were only in existence for 4 years at that point. These numbers are remarkably higher in terms of being asked. Basically, 100% of girls have been asked to send a naked picture, and a lot of boys too. Then I asked about bothered. I have a couple good stories about that, but I'm going to skip it for the sake of time. But basically what we found here was those who sexted were more likely to have sex than those who had not sexted, which isn't totally surprising, right? I mean, if you're already having sex, you're probably likely sexting, and maybe vice versa. But we didn't really know, which has really important points. Like if we're wanting to prevent unsafe sex and sexting is predictive of sex, well, then we would want to prevent sexting to prevent sex. So it's not just an academic question. So to do that, and I'll give you just a couple seconds to digest this best cartoon ever. Yeah. So sometimes I choose to put this on and sometimes I choose not to, but I thought you guys were a good crowd. Anyway, so we looked at this longitudinally to see if sexting came first or sex came first. And what we found was that actually being asked and asking for a sex was not related to actual sex, but it was related to sending a sext, and sending a sext was related to having sex. So it preceded sex, which is really important from a prevention standpoint if we want to prevent unsafe sex. And so a lot of kids in the United States hate me because when this study came out, I did my media tour, and someone on the radio would ask, so what, obviously, invariably rather, would ask what advice I have for parents. And I would say, if you're with your kid right now, pull over and talk to your kids about sex and safe sex and healthy relationships, and keep talking to them about it. So that, that was my hope that this research came out of this research. All right, so should we care about sexting? And the what I come back to is maybe. I don't care if two 17-year-olds are sexting each other. Who cares? I also don't care if two 17-year-olds are consensually having sex. From a public health standpoint, I just don't care. Also, that's me in the picture when I used to have hair like that. I have hair, really pretty hair now, but when I had hair that was that sort of up in the front, yeah, that was me. But we should care about it when it's younger kids, when it is forced or non-consensual or coerced. That's when we should care about it. All right. So all this stuff, we talked about dating violence, we talked about unsafe sex and non-consensual sexting. And so what do we do about it? I'm going to I want to have time for questions, and we have about 5 more minutes to talk about this. We have a program that we adapted from Canada. It's called 4th R, Reading, Writing, Arithmetic, and Relationships. The 4th R stands for relationships. And so what this does is teaches kids how to be in a relationship. And if I were to ask y'all if you were taught how to be in a relationship, I assume none of you would raise your hands, because we're not taught this really essential human skill, right? We're taught how to play music, how to be creative, how to write, how to read, all that stuff, but we're not taught how to be in a relationship. So the idea is to teach these relationship skills like we teach other things. And it's really focused on, what I really like is that it's not just on preventing violence. What I think, and what some of our research is bearing out, is that we can target relationships as a sort of protective factor to prevent a lot of bad outcomes. And it makes sense, if and how do kids learn how to be in a relationship now? Well, they learn from their friends who equally suck at it. They learn from the media, which sucks. They learn from their parents, which may be good, but even well-intentioned parents, they might argue in front of their kids and then make up elsewhere. Or they learn from trial and error. So the fact that most kids do okay is impressive. But we want them to do better than okay, right? We want them to excel and to be healthy and happy and have those positive relationships, not just a nonviolent relationship. So we have different lessons. So this is taught in class. We teach the coaches, because our health teachers, who are usually coaches, and especially in Texas, we give them the lesson plans, and there's these different themes, and they take it over. And we also have one on healthy eating. Going back to some of the things I like about it, it targets multiple problem behaviors. I mentioned that earlier, which is great because, the way schools have it now is they have an assembly on bullying, our Red Ribbon Week to talk about substance use, maybe a guest speaker to talk about violence, all that sort of stuff. Those don't work. We know that those one-offs do not work. We know that there's a dose response. The higher the dose, the better the response. So this program replaces health class, and is a semester or a year long, and gives them these skills to be healthy relationships. So it's universally focused, which is great, because then there's no stigma by taking out the bad kids, quote unquote, and then putting them with other bad kids, which only teaches them how to be good criminals. Alternative schools, juvenile detention centers are just stupid. They don't work, and they actually are iatrogenic. So anyway, the whole class or whole school is involved is great. And it's again about positive youth development. It's not just about avoid, but how to be happy and healthy. We also show that it works. So you could ignore that consort diagram, but basically what we found with the initial year is that it reduced violence. People that we did a randomized controlled trial. 12 middle schools got the intervention, 12 schools had health class as usual, and we saw that the intervention schools, kids in those did better in terms of reduced violence a year later. We also saw that it continued to prevent violence 3 years later. And then in our most recent study, which I guess I don't have a slide for, just came out, was that 5 years later, so we implemented this in seventh grade. 5 years later, when they were seniors in high school, kids that received the program were less depressed than kids who did not, which is amazing. This fairly cheap, uh, not fairly cheap program implemented in seventh grade had kids less depressed 5 years later. If we can, do this nationwide, imagine the impressive results that we could have. We've been doing a lot of work with 4th-R. We're still studying it. We're adapting it for a juvenile detention population. We're adapting it for kids in foster homes. We're looking at it with community colleges and colleges. So we're doing a lot of work with this. I'm going to skip this side, but know that we have a texting intervention as well that is pretty cool. And this is my favorite quote. If you're going to do anything for the common man, you have to start before he becomes a man. It's a little sexist, but you get what it's saying. Here's my team and my contact information. Feel free to email me with data requests or anything else. My data is your data. Taxpayers fund our research, and they should get to use it. So I am going to stop sharing and open it up for questions.
Dr. Temple, thank you for that just outstanding presentation and amazing data, and also for reminding us not to Google your name. But as Dr. Temple said, you open up for questions. You can either raise your hand and unmute yourself or go ahead and enter it into the chat. Don't be shy.
I was told at the beginning of this that there's sometimes a lot of questions when it's an engaging talk. So if not having any questions is deeply hurting my feelings.
Well, I guess while we're waiting, I'll start. Early on in your talk, you talked about how dating violence was basically like a two-way street, which is amazing to me. I'd never come across that. So were you able to expand on, I guess, the data that showed that or supported that?
Yeah, so I actually started this when I was at North Texas. We were some of I say we, it was my mentor was one of the first people to look at sort of bi-directional relationships, because at that time, you weren't like, and I'm not kidding when I say you could not talk about female to male violence. I did that at one early talk, and I got basically people threw tomatoes at me. People did not want to think about the fact that women can be violent as well, because it was like we were blaming them. But, it's not blaming them. It's just the fact that violence begets violence. So one of the reasons we know that batterer intervention programs for the longest time didn't work is because they would get these dudes in there who were violent and needed to be in there. And then they would give them some tools to not be violent, and then they would go back to the same relationship, and the woman would use violence, and then he would use violence because his tools were run out, or they would continue drinking together. And that's not blaming the victim here, the woman here. They're smaller. They're the ones that end up in the emergency room. They're the ones that are psychologically abused and sexually abused. They're the real victims in this. But by ignoring their use of violence, we do a disservice to them as well. And so that's what our data shows, is that it is a two-way street. But please don't mistake that as as that men are, that there should be a battered husband syndrome or something like that. That's not what we're saying with this data. We're just saying we can't ignore it.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat from Dr. Gong. She asked, have you looked at rates of premature births in your cohort?
That's a fantastic question, and we have not with this, and I'm kind of surprised because I've worked with the Premature Birth Network on some other studies, and I'm surprised I haven't thought of that. And I don't know. I wonder if kids now they're 30. I wonder if they know if they were premature births. But that is such a good question that we are designing our survey right now for the next wave. And I think it's definitely worth the real estate to ask them that. Uh, that's that's really cool. And especially with our future studies where we're going to include their children, we'll definitely ask the parents about their children because they'll definitely know, right? So that's a really cool question. Thank you for asking that. In fact, I'm going to copy it so I don't forget. And Dr. Gong, if you're interested in the data, hit us up and you can have first author.
Thank you. This is Dr. Gong. Actually, I'm looking at it from the perspective of the recent article about the causes of maternal mortality being more related to what you're talking about. And so, in one of the things that I'm interested in is how to prevent prematurity. So, if we have people that have more violence, do they have more babies that are born premature?
Yeah.
Or were they themselves premature, which also talks about history of violence because then you have violence at birth as well. So
Yeah.
it's
No,
fascinating.
I love it. And Dr. Gong, I was in the Department of OB-GYN at UTMB for 17 years, and it used to piss me off that what you said is the main causes of premature death, maternal mortality was stuff that was preventable, right? So violence, homicide, suicide, drug use, substance use, and we got such, and I say we being a psychologist and a behavioral health researcher, if you look at the amount of funding for those types of things versus ectopic pregnancy or whatever causes bad stuff on the physical side, it dwarfed it, and so I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, there was just New England Journal article that reported that data, which everybody works on cardiovascular and preeclampsia and so forth, but actually violence and way overshadows those numbers. And as a neonatologist, you see that that there's a lot of dysfunctionality in families that have premature babies. So it would be great to look into that, and hopefully that can prevent other things when we understand the role that violence plays.
Yep, absolutely. I'm looking at this. Recently, there's been a lot of news and concerns about the online groups promoting misogyny, nihilism, and violence in general. Data connecting this more extreme online behavior to sexting, gateway risky online behavior. So it's a really good question, and with incels and everything else, and if you look at mass shootings, this is to your point. If you look at mass shootings, you see one common denominator, and it's typically some sort of misogyny or racism or hatred. That seems to be the underlying factor. So you see, I think it's like 60% of mass shooters have a history of family violence. So yeah, this point is fantastic. Now, whether or not sexting is a gateway, I doubt it. And I say this as well. Let me couch that a little bit differently. I think it is, and data starts to bear this out, is that it is someone who consensually sexed is probably no more likely to have any of these other types of stuff than someone who does not. Now, if someone is sextorting someone or posting revenge porn or coercing someone or sending dick pics without consent, absolutely. I bet that is related to, that sort of antisocial behavior is related to these other antisocial behaviors. So, yes, but consenting, the vast majority of kids who sex, probably no more likely. No one even asked about my onion article, but if you look at Google onion and
Maybe
sexting,
they're
there's
Googling it. Yeah.
yeah, I've had like three different. That's when I knew I made it. Is when three different onion pieces talked about my research, and it's pretty good.
Oh, all right. Any final questions before we finish up with Dr. Temple here?
And I know most of you aren't UTSA necessarily, but fear the beak. Go Roadrunners. Thank you all so much for having me. Dr. Ranch, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Delia, thank you for arranging everything. I appreciate all that y'all do for kids.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Temple. For the audience, remember the attendance code is in the chat. And also, please complete the post-presentation survey. It definitely helps out Dr. Temple and our program as well. And I'm sure a lot of people are distracted with the long weekend coming up. Maybe that's why everyone's quiet. But thank you again, Dr. Temple, and have a great day and great weekend.
Thank y'all.